Good morning, good morning, good morning. Oh, even the technology's slow this morning. Good morning, people of LinkedIn, friends, family. Good morning, people of YouTube. Good morning, Lee Chambers. How are you doing?
I'm good, Cheryl. It's it might be dark outside, but we're gonna have an enlightening conversation.
Oh, I hope so. It's dark, right? It's dark. Please say good morning if you're joining us live in the chat. I was just saying to Lee, so apologies if I've got reflection in my specs because the window that I'm sitting in front of, it is still dark. It looks like is it dusk that you get in the morning? That's what it looks like, right? No, dusk is the evening, isn't it? It's definitely dawn like. So I've got Lee Chambers with me here. And because I've got Lee, and Lee is, as I like to describe it, LinkedIn famous, right? He's actually you probably get recognized even by people that aren't on LinkedIn at this point, Lee. But I had to put like some decent makeup on this morning because I've got Lee Chambers with me. So good morning, Adrienne. Adrienne joining us from Cornwall. I want to remember. Good morning, Adrienne. How are things for you? Is it still wet and windy down in Cornwall? It's very wet here. I went out for my morning walk. Lee, whereabouts are you joining us from? Just remind me where you are.
So I'm in Preston in Lancashire, where it rains an awful lot.
Preston. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think you've exported it to the south of the country today. Good morning, Emily Foster. Good morning. Thank you for joining. Good morning, Judith. Judith Glashan. Good morning, Judith. So we're getting into this topic, an interesting topic, a little bit spicy, a little bit there's often a little bit of controversy around it. See, Lee, Emily said Lee is definitely famous and probably and probably not even just on LinkedIn. I tell you what, Lee, funny story about whether or not you're famous, right? I did an event in Dubai very recently. In November, I did an ERG summit. People asking me, can we bring Lee Chambers? Can I bring Lee Chambers next time?
Oh
So,
wow!
yeah, yeah. You heard it here first. Good morning, Jason. Jason Roberts, how are you doing? I need this conversation in my life. Looking forward to this one. I'm in Chelmsford. Jason's in Chelmsford. And Jason, I feel this is a topic you talk about quite a lot as well, actually, male allyship, but not necessarily just a topic that's talked about, because obviously allyship is a verb, right? It's a doing word. It's not just about the talking. But Jason, I would definitely put you in my camp of, amongst my favorite allies on the platform and in real life. So I've got with me Lee Chambers. Lee, good morning, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, pleasure, Cheryl. Looking forward to it.
Good. I've got your bio here, Lee. So I've got a tradition on this LinkedIn where I get ChatGPT to write your bio,
Oh God.
and then I know, and then you have to rate it out of 10. Okay, so here goes. This is what ChatGPT wrote. Lee is a so it could ChatGPT could really be hallucinating this morning. So let's see what Lee wrote. What ChatGPT wrote about Lee. Lee is a UN Women Award winner, a Kavli Fellow of the US National Academy of Sciences, the first Black British Fellow in its history, and a board member on the CMI Women's Committee. His work focuses on turning allyship into something practical, measurable, and behaviour led. He's worked with organisations including, drumroll, the Bank of England, UBS, IKEA, Oracle, PwC, KPMG, NHS Trust, and local government. And he's also founder of an award-winning workplace wellbeing agency. Lee brings both professional expertise and lived experience to this conversation, including time as a stay-at-home dad, which shaped much of his work on gender, work, and leadership. Lee is short, not short literally, but short to the point, honest and grounded. Welcome, Lee. How did ChatGPT do with that introduction?
Actually, it was pretty good.
Good.
Minimal hallucinations. Generally quite factual. Yeah, it did well, Cheryl.
Amazing. And we've got Bernadette Thompson, OBE, in the comments, who we both know and love. Bernadette, good morning, Bernadette. Bernadette says, big up, Brother Lee, for sure. let's get into this conversation. Let's just start before we start, because obviously your organization, if people have known you for a little while, they will know you from like your sort of like the well-being space, essentialized and all of that stuff. Tell us about Male Allies UK and how that started, why you wanted to start that, and I know that you're working on that with some incredible other individuals as well. So just tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I think for me, obviously, in many ways, it started over 10 years ago now, as a bit of a side of desk project, when I was learning to walk again after I was ill and doing that alongside my newborn daughter. And when you lose the ability to walk, it challenged my masculinity in a lot of ways. Really made me think who I was when things that I'd taken as really important and also taken for granted were removed. And that then got amplified when I became a stay-at-home dad, stepping out of my tech business to be that primary caregiver and spending a lot of time with mothers and grandmothers, really getting perception of things that I hadn't really noticed, hadn't really considered. It allowed me to practice really deep, intentional, and active listening. But that also put me onto a bit of a research pathway when I was doing my masters to understand how people of different genders navigate different environments, and also around gender dynamics in workplace cultures. And those were two of my modules of my masters. So I had the academic stuff going on. I had the lived experience stuff going on. I had the unpacking and unlearning from a gender lens perspective myself. And now I just got curious about what I could do, but realised actually I didn't know. And in a very, male-coded way, you would want to jump in and create solutions and change things. But I actually kind of thought I need to be humble enough to just continue to learn, continue to listen, build a set of skills to be able to do this effectively. And really, that's kind of where the journey started. Naturally, I've done work on the gender health gap, and that was kind of a pathway in to the very well-being consultancy that I built. But realizing that to close the gender health gap, you need everyone engaged, you need everyone playing a role. And that's where, over the past few years, it's been very much focused on how can we actually create more gender unity to actually close the gaps, whether that be gender health, how people are treated in the workplace, how people can access politics, how people can get equity in sports, and just in wider society. So really, we exist to close those gender gaps that exist. Obviously, gender gaps can potentially go multi-directional in different ways for different things. But our kind of sole purpose is how do we close those gaps so people stop falling into them? Because it's never good for anyone when we fall into gaps. And the wider the gap, the more disconnected we are, the harder it is for us to work together effectively. Can close those gaps. There's more togetherness, more unity, and more combination of our unique brilliance to achieve better things for us as a society.
Yeah, incredible. As you were sort of talking through your journey to getting to here, to Male Allies, it made me think, gosh, we could have talked about that, gender gap, the gender dynamics. When you mentioned that, was it your master's, you said gender dynamics in workplace cultures? It made me think of, in fact, I think it was one of your posts where I saw it, that New York Times podcast. have women ruined the workplace, which then obviously got changed to has liberal feminism ruined the workplace, right?
But one really interesting thing, Cheryl, if you go back through the past 100 years of publications, you will find a headline that women have broken pretty much every system we have. Women have brought the workplace, the financial system, they brought caregiving, they brought children, they brought technology. Like, there is a headline of women being blamed for breaking everything. In fact, I tried to find headlines that blamed men as a collective for things. It's really funny. Like, when men are getting blamed for something, it's very individualized. It's this man is a bad apple. This man is bad. These group of bros are not helpful. It's never a whole subset of 51% of the population who've ruined all these different things. They've ruined marriage. They've ruined, and it was just fascinating. I'll probably post a lovely collage of all the times in history women have been blamed for, breaking systems and ruining things, because you see, it's quite a trend to blame women. Quite convenient, it appears.
I guess it's part. I guess that's all part of the system, isn't it? The ranking of different identities, depending on who's in power, and the biases that we have towards, spotting those flaws, maybe in an individual in that group, and then, as you say, then basically attributing it to the whole group. Right? Women have done this, and I'm not going to say that women never say these things about men, right? But that's for like another show. Maybe I'll get Bernadette on here next time to talk about sometimes the stereotyping about men. But it's really interesting what you say in terms of those headlines, and we are talking about um and it'll be interesting when we get into like the definition of male allyship. We are talking about, as you say, the headlines like at a societal level, in terms of, when you analyze when something goes wrong, how groups get blamed or groups don't get blamed by those that are in power, right? Or those that have some kind of power, which is really interesting. Let's get into the definition. What do we mean by male allyship? Just you give me your definition. What does it mean to you? How do you define it to people when they ask you, what do you mean by male allyship?
Yeah, so it's a fascinating one, Cheryl, because obviously my company has been called this, but if I'm honest, I don't really like it. So, especially when I came across the term allyship in 2016, for me, it brought up immediate thoughts of militaristic conflicts, as in some really unhelpful conflicts, blowing stuff up, good guys versus bad guys, come and join our cause because it's more important than their cause. And I felt it was very, very kind of splitting, very much side creating for conflict to win. So I was like, no, I don't like the word. Don't think this is the word that really resonates with me. But then, being me, like the curious 7-year-old child that I am, I was like, but where did it come from before it got co-opted into that? It actually comes from the old French word allier, which means to combine, to unite, and to come together.
Yeah.
And I was like, how can I bring that ancient original meaning back to the modern day? Then there's the fact, companies called male allies. That's binary. I don't like that. I find it quite affronting. And actually, from a etymological kind of word creation perspective,
Yeah.
it's not necessarily the correct framing. But the challenge is we're playing with accepted terms in this space. So for me, male allyship is not about not necessarily about the concept around men supporting women like it can be framed. I actually see it as men building allyship skills. So that is how, to me, we orient that word, because allyship is a universal skill set. Everyone can build allyship skills. But actually, what we find is that men historically have been less likely to build those skills because of the structures and systems that we live within. And while that is, in one way, a generalization, if I think about the over 1,000 people I've spoken to, interviewed, conducted research with, women are more likely to have both elements and completion around this type of skill set than men are. And there's reasons for that, just how we fundamentally navigate society.
Yeah.
There's more resistance and friction for women, which means more opportunity to, in some ways, build these skills. So we fundamentally help men to build those skills, because not only are those skills universal for everyone, but men have less opportunity to build them. What we also find is there's a reciprocity when you start to build those skills, that actually you start to be opening yourself up to being allied to yourself. And obviously, with a lot of my work around health, men being able to be allied to and supported is actually really powerful for men's health indicators and ability to actually be open to being supported, to seek being supported, and to not push away people trying to offer that support. So the skills in navigating difference in a really unpredictable world are really powerful. The self-awareness you build from building that skill set is much more than just inclusion. It fundamentally changes how you communicate, how you navigate challenge, how you are more open to learning, just how you become better connected to yourself and to others. There's an element of gender intelligence to it, Cheryl. Just understanding what it would be like to be in someone else's shoes, live in a different way. And I've seen that on my own journey, but also the men who have stepped into this start to share how beneficial it's been to them. But they're honest about some of the barriers they've faced, how they've had to embrace that discomfort and utilize that for growth, and how there's lots of myths and misconceptions until they stepped in, became active, started building the skill, made a few mistakes, and learnt from them, and gradually built that foundational skill set that meant they felt less fear. Because obviously fear is the biggest barrier to men stepping in this work quite often.
Do you know what? This is one of the reasons that I really love having these conversations, because you know, when you're sort of breaking down the definition of male allies, you know, even just the word allyship, I'm totally with you in terms of there are lots of terms around this work that we do, this work of inclusion and equity and all of that. And a lot of terms have just become kind of like baked in and coded in, but we don't always know what they mean, why they're used, what the intent, all of that stuff. So it's really useful for you to kind of break it back to, you know, what is its origin? A bit like you, especially male allies together, you know, men and allyship. We know that it can be like problematic, and we'll kind of get onto that. So I love the way that you explained there, you know, what it is that you're trying to do in that combination. The one thing that you said that really resonated was around the skill set, you know, the skill set of obviously, like in a generalized sense, men versus women in this space. And for me, the thing that came to mind automatically was just how we are socialized. You know, I'm very much of the school of, actually, in terms of when we're sort of all born, we're all sort of like pretty similar, right? Apart, there's a lot of overlap, right? But we know that in terms of how we are socialized, you know, little girls from a very young age are socialized to be more relational, to be, you know, kind of like more in tune with other people, etc., all of that stuff. So when you explain allyship in that context, it totally makes sense. Like, it totally makes sense in terms of, you know, because women are socialized to be more relational, that you know, generally we would be better equipped for allyship. I mean, it's not to say that we haven't met any women that aren't good allies, right? But I understand what you're saying in terms of, you know, that there's potentially this other need. There's a really interesting question here from Leighton Campbell that I'm going to go into. Do you know Leighton, Lee? Have you come across Leighton Campbell?
I recognise his little square on LinkedIn.
Leighton Campbell, Leighton, good morning and thank you for joining us. Leighton's gone right into the pointy end of some of this work. Have you found that some women's groups are resistant to men full stop, you know, or men's groups in particular, all around this work, and create barriers to allyship? Really good question, Leighton. Thank you for that. Leighton Campbell, for anybody that is watching and doesn't know, Leighton actually recently held the first International Men's Day conference and expo here in the UK. So again, congrats, Leighton, to you and the team. Yeah. Resistance from women, and actually or potentially creating barriers.
So I mean, that's an interesting question, Leighton, and I think there's a number of different areas we could go on that one. Firstly, in my own work, have I met women's groups who are still in a place of maturity where it being a safe space for women trumps men coming and engaging? Yes, I found some internal networks, especially in their younger days, are still more focused on creating that space for women to explore their experiences and don't feel that bringing men into the conversation at that point is particularly helpful to them as a collective, even though obviously there's a powerful aspect where men are there to be able to listen to and get more consciousness of women's lived experiences. In most women's groups, the honest truth is you have a group of women who would probably prefer to keep it gender exclusive. On the complete other side, a group of women who would love more and more men involved so they can get more perspective, maybe even come and do some of the heavy lifting or the logistics, or come and support us, or just realise that they're having 50% of a conversation if it is just women, especially if it's a more developed network or group. I do kind of feel sometimes we need to be mindful of where emotional labour sits in society. and not expect women's groups to be the ones driving allyship for men. They definitely need to feed in, and women's lived experiences need to be part of that. But I'm quite the proponent that for people like me and yourself, Leighton, we need to be the ones who are working to create space for men to build these skills. We need to be using our kind of mental capacity that we have to be able to create that space, to use the resonance of being men to connect with other men. And don't necessarily leave that to women's groups to be the sole driver of that, because that's historically how it's been, even in very male-dominated industries. That's not to say that every women's group has got it right. Many women's groups are still evolving and learning, especially in the current climate. But the truth is, if I think about the nature of my work, I get as much pushback from men and women based on their own perspectives. Men and women are not homogenous groups. There's massive diversity in a small group of men and a small group of women. I think women's groups, I would say overall, women's groups have decent balance. There is some replication in groups, if you look across, say, sectors and stuff like that. But I think in this work, to put the onus on women's groups is probably not fair in the bigger scheme of things, but to appreciate that for some women, they are frustrated at the way society's been structured and how they've been treated. And that can sometimes, for them, come out as a lot of frustration towards where we're at. And that sometimes comes out as frustration towards men. We've got a lowable emotion, i.e. anger, but women are not even really allowed that. It is such a fine balance, but that's why it requires dialogue, because otherwise there is division, and we see at the minute with words like allyship being weaponized and other words in this space. It's stopping us even having that dialogue to be able to actually realize we want similar things. Our challenges are interconnected, and it's only when we bring our shared toolkits together can we actually make some really good structural change.
I've got a question for you as well. So on the back of what Leighton has asked, in terms of particularly, there'll be some people that are watching this that maybe lead women's networks, right? What does this look like when it's done well, and what does it look like when it's done badly in terms of male allyship? Because when I think sometimes about my experience of and it's not even necessarily women's groups, but I think even just sometimes like events, for example, where there is, discussion and conversation, where sometimes it feels like the space sometimes is monopolized by certain voices, and that may be because of seniority. But we know, there are quite a few studies around things like, if, for example, there is a group discussion, you often do end up with a situation where it's mixed gender. You can often quite easily end up with a situation where men dominate a conversation, even just like in a group discussion space. Do you know what I mean? So because when you said about, the safe space versus bringing men in and kind of that contrast, that's immediately where my mind went to, is I sort of thought back to, some situations where I've seen that happen, but also we know that dynamic does happen. It's something that Mary-Ann Seagart, I think, talks about in The Authority Gap in that book. So just maybe talk a little bit about your experience of sometimes where the positive intent is maybe there from men in terms of allyship, but maybe when, for example, going into women's groups, it doesn't necessarily land well. Do you know what I mean? Do you want to just talk about that a little bit, maybe?
Because you know what, Cheryl, and there isn't really anyone better placed to talk about networks than yourself. But there is that wider aspect of, quite often, men's entry points into this is from a place of passion or realization, and then the true genuine desire to help. But obviously, if we think about some of that kind of male coding, male conditioning, you think about the t-shirts we've worn since we were one, with the leader, the builder, the constructor, the solutionist, the winner. All our toys are break it, build it, fix it, solution and outcome orientated. And we constantly shaped in that way. And then we come into a situation where, oh my God, we can make a difference. We can actually, I've seen that it's not fair and I want to make things fair. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself stepping deep into it, and thinking that you have solutions, or you start to replay things that you might have tried previously in different examples that are not as relevant. The truth is, you need to facilitate these spaces. It's really funny when you have the juxtaposition of men not necessarily sharing certain aspects of their own lives on a regular basis with people, but being very quick to deliver expertise in what is an expertise economy. And men feel valued when they have expertise, they have, solutions to bring, they are able to actually express opinion as knowledge. And that's fulfilling for a lot of men. The challenge is that in this work, the skills of allyship are about knowing when to step forward, to intervene, to challenge, when to step to the side, to invite feedback, to partner, to sponsor, to drive forward other people's initiatives, progress, and when to step back and yield the space, to amplify others' voices. The learning of how to position yourself, whether to step forward, whether to step to the side, whether to step back, it is a process. That's part of building the skills of allyship. So sometimes men's eagerness to come in actually presents an opportunity to highlight that skill building component in a gentle way, to just express that we want you to keep the eagerness, because the eagerness to learn is important, and it helps you to continue to motivate yourself, because it will get uncomfortable. But to just overlay that, we almost kind of make them think you've just walked into the dojo wanting to learn a new martial art. You see people on the side doing spinning kicks and flying punches, and you just then bring yourself in right into the middle of that and say, right, I want to duel two of you. When actually you're like, what do you do when you walk into the dojo? You go over to one of the trainers who starts teaching you how to stand straight, and then how to move one foot, and then how to hold position, and how to change your stance. And then at some point, after some of that fundamental work, you learn how to throw one single strike.
Yeah.
You're not jumping straight into combinations and complex moves. And it's the truth is, in this expertise economy where men are particularly sensitive to that, the idea of being a beginner, especially if you're a senior leader, subject matter expert, it's hard, because you have to admit that. But then I'm like, is it natural to be an expert in the lived experience of others in shoes you've probably never walked in? So it is that, Cheryl, trying to help them see that, well, there's a reason why women get interrupted 3 times more than men in meetings, and that's not just by other men, that's by women as well. It's because of these things. So it's an actual opportunity to showcase some of the things as well that you might need to be looking out for, because you probably potentially in those situations be doing those things. And using it as a learning point rather than a blaming point, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I love it. Leighton, I hope that was useful. I think that was a really necessary discussion and conversation. And Lee, so many of the things that you said there kind of resonated in terms of men coming into this space, especially if they've had a daughter, right? Because we know that is a trigger for a lot of men. They've had a daughter, all of a sudden they're like, oh my gosh, there's like, there are so many barriers, what can I do to help? But yeah, coming in with all of that passion, all of that positive intent, a bit like a Tigger in a situation that they don't necessarily have the expertise for. And Corinne has commented on that as well. Such great points raised around helping to find solutions rather than feeling you have to solve everything. This is to the men that are in the space, and also the pressure men have felt to be the expert in the room that solves everything. Yeah, I loved what you said, Lee. You said about a framework of knowing when to step forwards, to the side and backwards. I wanted to just come back to a comment that Cheryl Samuels raised here. Good morning, Cheryl. Thank you for these insightful comments. So men in the workplace don't speak up openly on issues that require male allyship, like sexual safety. I think that's very true. I think often a lot of those things are kind of swept in the carpet. Privately they are supportive. Are they? Are they, Cheryl? To my namesake, I'm asking you, are they really? On that particular topic, right? We can get into that because there is a spectrum when it comes to sexual sex. And do you know what? We are in that season, Christmas party season. Let's not even in the comments start sharing our experiences of Christmas parties. And I say this as somebody, right, who has had 20 odd years of Christmas parties and conferences. We have not even got long enough for me to share with you my experiences of Christmas. Anyway, that's for a whole nother LinkedIn live. But to Cheryl's question, what can we do to get men to come forward more to speak up and to drive issues? I guess particularly about this particular topic, right? Because we are in that season, Christmas party season. So how do we get men to come forward and speak up and drive these issues? Which links back to Lee, you said something about almost like, where the expertise is around, men and what men need and men's issues. And we know that when it comes to male violence against women and girls, this is like an issue for men to kind of like talk about and formulate, right? So how do we get more men to talk about that, particularly in the workplace and at this time of year when it comes to like, events and that kind of thing?
Yeah. Well, really, it's a relevant question, Cheryl. I mean, there is a reason why we run the Mistletoe Isn't Consent campaign. That's thinking about what men can do.
I've never heard of that. Yeah.
So that's thinking about what men can do, but also what organizations can do. And there's both in the moment kind of stuff around that bystander intervention being an upstander piece, and thinking about the different routes you can take in those situations, and whether you do distract or you delegate or you document for HR in the morning or you delay. And it's thinking about, in terms of your skill set as well as a man, are you a more direct person who would find it easy to directly intervene? Do you need to get more people involved based on not necessarily your comfort level, but your skill level in doing that? And then there's a piece around for organizations thinking about the inclusivity of the Christmas party in the first place. Like, I get deeply frustrated that given we're in a place where the Worker Protection Act is like 18 months in, and companies are still throwing these parties and just not, I mean, it's sometimes because they leave it to people who it's not their job, and it's side of desk. And it's almost always women. Like, I was sat next to a woman on the train yesterday, works for a tech company. 2 people set up the Christmas party for her team. It's 2 of the 3 women on the whole team who did it.
Right.
And we're talking about glue work and the kind of the non-promotive tasks. We had an interesting conversation on that train. But to Cheryl's point, I mean, what we find is that if men have a bit of a process in how to do this, it's helpful. That bit of structure, and whether that is, a kind of like a call out, call in, call forward type mechanism, some of the stuff we do in our work, whether that is more structured bystander intervention work like the 5 Ds. But I think it's getting men, because obviously more and more men are starting to sit there sometimes hearing other men speak and think, always takes it a bit too far, he does. But it's always a bit of a challenge to call out other men on the spot when you're thinking about placing social hierarchies, when there's power dynamics at play. And what most men don't realize is most of the other men sat around are also thinking the same thing. We've seen this with men in the workplace. We've also seen this with boys in schools. Most of them have a similar tolerance point to understanding when something has gone too far. And when it goes beyond that, most of them are stood there thinking, oh, I should probably do something. But it's at that point they're like, oh, but if I do it like this, what could happen? What we've got now, Cheryl, is a place where if I look at this work and I'm speaking to men about what is stopping them being active, what's making them passive, apathetic, all these great men, great values, really good people, you could really rely on them. What's making them so passive? And it's anticipatory fear. So it's the fear of anticipating what might happen. And the truth is, the more even self-aware men are worried about looking like a hero or a savior, looking like they're, being condescending or patronizing to women, thinking about taking away women's autonomy in certain situations. Even that kind of going on in the head, like, am I gonna take their autonomy and choice away? Am I going to end up speaking for them, not with them? And, even men who are kind of in a place where they're really self-aware still wonder, like, what if I get it wrong? Trying to help. And there is even that kind of, I hate to say it, but there is some stuff in society around this kind of weaponized incompetence. That then makes men worry about, well, look, actually, what? Maybe I'm not that good at it. So it's complex. Is the answer?
There's so much to get into, Lee. Here, the weaponized incompetence. I always used to say this, right? When it came to Mother's Day cards and Father's Day cards, right? You see it in terms of, there's almost like an encouraging of men to be, just sat in front of the sofa with a remote control. It's like, what is this stereotype of men? This where it's like celebrated. I'm like, who are these men? But I tell you what, I've got it. There are lots of questions and comments. I'm going to do my best to get back to them. But Jason, your comment really stood out to me, and I thought I need to get Lee to comment on this because it made me kind of sort of scratch my head internally. It reminded me of the saying, boys will be boys. Right, this comment. So just for anybody that can't read, it says, we do need to allow men to be men, though. Embrace our differences of approach. And Jason, a lot of people are probably thinking this, but not saying this. And I'm certain that Lee probably meets a lot of people in his work that come with this view, right? So embrace our differences of approach. Right now, men are being asked to deny their masculinity. I did once have somebody say to me that, let me not say that, and that demand is detrimental to allyship if we can't show up as our authentic selves. Jason, do you want to just clarify what you mean by this in terms of when you say right now men are being asked to deny their masculinity and that demand is detrimental to allyship? Just maybe clarify what you mean while we just get into this. Lee, what are your thoughts on this? Because this is probably quite a common pushback around a lot of this conversation, this view of there are differences in how we are, men and women and approach things differently. Why do men need to sort of like change their approach in certain settings? Jason, maybe just give us a little bit of context around this one. Lee, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's a big question, Jason. Like, see, because what I think is you kind of can look at it in an equivalency way, right? Because lots of men value this idea of being a protector, really kind of see that as core to who they are. A lot of that is there is definitely a part of that is kind of biologically encoded because there's an evolutionary aspect to who we are. But the truth is that's then built upon by the comic book heroes, by the programs from our youth that haven't aged well, from the many things that have built into us that have then created that narrative around being a protector. But then you're not necessarily asking men to not be that when you're asking them to intervene. So there are lots of things where actually you're not necessarily asking men to deny their masculinity. The truth is, what we need to appreciate is there are 4 billion ways to be a man. Like, masculinity is your own journey with understanding who you are. And it's not this binary thing. Like, when we're saying that you're denying people the masculinity, it's suggesting that we're actually denying one binary way of being. Like, if I think back to what we said at the start, Cheryl, men and women's ability to create enough space to explore the masculine and feminine traditionally traded, traits or aspects of themselves is something that's heavily policed in society.
Yeah.
But actually, most powerful thing is being able to actually start to explore who you are and the bits of you and start to find comfort in expressing that. And I do feel that when we look at allyship in this really kind of binary way, that men need to support women and stop being like men, that is a weaponized narrative that's being thrown out by certain people that makes men feel disenfranchised and then allows them to be commodified in communities, bring them together in that outrage and disdain, and then tell them that the way to win in the world is to retain or regain or even fight for power and control and dominance over other people, so you get freedom that way. But thinking, allyship on that surface level, it can feel a little bit like you're trading off scarcity. Other people get opportunities. I reduce the barriers for them. Suddenly my chances are less. What's really fascinating is the more men who go on this journey, they actually share that. At the start, I thought, I'm probably going to lose out here. But then the skills they've built, how it's started to make them feel and treat themselves, how it's made them more connected to others, they're actually starting to see a whole range of benefits. They don't have to have the right answer all the time. They don't always have to win. And suddenly they find that it gives them a space to explore who they are through the vehicle of actually helping someone else. Which comes back to what a lot of men actually want to do. As much as they're being told you need to be self-sufficient and autonomous and independent, they realize the joy they get out of supporting other people. And while for me, Cheryl, I've got a daughter and that's why I'm passionate, I can find it quite infuriating, because it's not like you didn't have a partner and lots of women who you work with and probably sisters and definitely had a mother. I have to be accepting that we all have our own drivers and motivators into this work and not be judgmental and be curious.
But the daughter thing is really interesting, because as you say there, and I'm going to get back to Jason's point. But the daughter thing, as you say, all men, give or take, have a mother in their that possibly was in their lives at one point. Many of them have sisters and partners. But I've met, many men for whom it's the having a daughter. For some reason, that just seems to like flick a switch. I don't know what it is. I think it's really interesting. There's probably some research about it somewhere, I'm guessing.
It's because, Cheryl, it's easy to explore what the future might be like when you're guiding someone into it, when you feel that protective responsibility, and all of a sudden you're starting to think about the vicarious experiences that they might have, and it creates this bridge into awareness and understanding. Because what some men who I've spoken to, their turning point was like when someone said, well, would you have your daughter work in this team with its current attitude and ways of working and some of the things that go on? And they think to themselves, they see the daughter who's probably like 6, suddenly 15 years later at 21, coming into the workplace, and they're like, oh.
Which it's interesting because it's tapping into, you said about it's tapping into that protective conditioning, the protective coding, right? And then it's kind of then around the daughter, and then that kind of helps you. I love it. It's a really interesting perspective to understand.
It is, because there's a point of it again where there's this expectation that you are playing that hierarchical position of protector and that women need protecting. And the truth is, if you default to that, that's a bit of a patriarchal norm that's not necessarily helpful, because you take women's autonomy away thinking they need protecting, but you want to protect your own family and you're always going to be very protective of your own children. So there's like a duality of that, where if you don't care about your children at all, you're neglectful. But if you're overprotective, you can take their autonomy away and don't give them the space to explore and take risks and learn from that. Like so many things in the world, Cheryl, it's about balance, and it's really hard to find that balance.
It's that duality and that nuance, and that's why I love these conversations, right? I was explaining to Lee offline. I have a love-hate relationship with social media, right? But part of it is because you can't often explain this level of nuance in a post, or particularly in the comment section, right? I totally get it. But it's really important that we have these rich, and hopefully this has been incredibly useful for the people watching. Jason, I thank you for clarifying here, that this situation of wanting to be an ally. And I see this a lot on LinkedIn. Like I see men that are trying to be an ally getting completely dragged for whatever they say. Whenever they chime in on something that's about like a women's thing, and even I sometimes side eye somebody, right? If they a man, if they go in clumsily on a particular topic, I sometimes side eye them. So I just keeping it like 100, right? So Jason is saying, I want to be an ally, but it's a current climate of disdain and misandry towards men. I do agree with that. It's very hard to get it right.
Yeah,
I agree with that, Jason.
And I think if you look on social media, it's the shallows. It's a polarization engine.
Yeah.
It's designed to emotively engage people in things they deeply resonate with or things that they're highly against. The truth is, the current climate, fear in men engaging in this is up. And that is not necessarily just around the gender conversation, but the wider societal discourse and division that we're facing. And that runs across all different intersections. And it just makes people fear having those conversations. It makes people fearful of stepping in. What I will say is social media is probably not the space to step in. The little, small, intentional, inclusive moments in your everyday life are actually a lot more important than performative gestures on social media. And that's the sandbox to learn. It took me years of doing stuff in real life before I felt emboldened enough to go on social media and start to navigate some of these conversations. The really challenging thing is if that's your starting point, you will very quickly, because of the nature of social media, probably step back away again, because it's just not the place, because you don't get the depth, you don't get the nuance. It's not designed to have dialogue and debate around things. It's not even designed to help us learn. It's designed to make money out of us. And that's extracting from us, not giving us the space to expand and express. So
yeah. And it's Don't even get me started on social media. You'll be lucky if you even see me on here next year. I'm just kidding. But it's for topics like this in particular. So back to Jason's point around the allyship, for topics like this, it is a very, very difficult space to navigate for sure in terms of discussing male allyship, but also those feelings. Jason, you talked about men being treated with disdain, and I guess I've heard somebody talk about casual misandry. I totally hear you. I think there is a lot of that goes on social media, unfortunately. I want to just whiz back through the comments and see if we can just maybe get some quick fire answers to some of the questions, because I know some people have put specific questions in. So I want to just do that really quickly. Any advice in the best ways to support female colleagues at various stages of their careers and common barriers they face at each of those stages? Do you want to go for that one, Lee?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I suppose one of the things in this work is actually getting to know the individuals involved, because while there are some commonalities in barriers, those barriers tend to sustain throughout different levels of women's career journeys. And what I would say is usually the best thing to do is get to know people and then think about what they actually need by having a conversation with what they need. Because one of the biggest challenges in this work is us thinking, okay, so these are 5 common challenges that women have. Let's try and solve those. When actually, if you speak to the few women on your team, you'll find that there was probably one common challenge they've all got, but then there's some unique ones. And it's kind of not overlaying what you think they need based on the typical, because again, that's denied. We're in a simple world where if you are a woman, there are a common set of challenges that you will face because you are a woman. And that's reality. But also, there's a whole other thing around compounding intersections, unique experiences, unique barriers that are not spreading the commonality in the same way. And there's, it's ultimate understanding. There are both of those things. Commonalities of challenge, but also lots of unique ones as well. And that just means get a little bit curious, ask some questions, but don't expect women to teach you. Do
Well,
some of the research first and then come with specific things that might build upon that. So it clearly shows that you've utilized the many resources that
yeah,
there are now to get more of an
like
understanding around that.
absolutely. And I'll just add on to that one that some of the examples that I've heard of that I'm aware of real allyship, things like sharing your salary with women, so sharing how much you earn, speaking up and amplifying women's voices. There's a really good example in Barack Obama's book, like the first one that he did, The Audacity of Hope, that one, maybe, I think, I can't remember, but there's a really good example of, Lee talked about the research around interrupting women. So we know that those kinds of things happen. So just a real small kind of like everyday things, when you see that happen, you don't need to interrupt the person that's done the interrupting, but afterwards you can say, I think Cheryl wanted to say something. Cheryl, what were you going to say? And, amplifying voices. So just in the everyday, and then also, trying to be objective. So if you are sitting in things like calibration reviews and performance reviews and those kinds of conversations at end of year, just be listening out for objectivity. So when somebody says, oh yeah, we should do such and such because they're a great person or they're a great guy or whatever, be the person in the room that's challenging and asking for the evidence and the data. Like, be that person. That's what I'd say, just to add on to that. The thing that you said there, Lee. So John Massey, good morning, John, had a colleague make the point this week about, they don't like the "we need to educate" mantra. Lee, you said something which is really useful about, do a little bit of work. So if you want to go in and be an ally, part of that journey actually is doing some of the work yourself. So maybe just some pointers around where people can go to, or materials that you think are useful actually for men that want to be more clued up kind of in this space to other genders.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's everything, obviously, from, we've already discussed the Marianne Seagart's Authority Gap, Caroline Corrado-Prevez's Invisible Women. Yeah, the Good Guys by Brad and David out in the US. That's kind of one of the original books on male allyship. But then there's so many other books around kind of navigating difference, having conversations in challenging times. There are lots of TED Talks, which, while only short, can just, generate some curiosity and some thinking. Around the point that's just been made around people not being like, we need to educate, it is considering around how those things are framed. Because the truth is that, our work is not about preaching to people. It's about getting them to be curious and building their own frameworks for learning. Because we can be honest, Cheryl, and we're in agreement on this. There's been lots of inclusion work over the past 5 years that's been very, very preachy, very, very, well, it has to be like this, very, very, this group goes through this, and very little think about what inclusion means here, how it can be relevant to us, how we co-create it, and make sure everyone gets a voice in the shaping of it. And the truth is, inclusion should make people think and start to understand what drives them and the role that they can play, not tells them what to do. Because then you remove their ability. Like, part of the allyship journey is to not be told, here's a 4-step framework to do it, but to actually think, how do I explore and understand enough to be able to start to use my own autonomy and agency to think about what I can do in different situations where the typical 4-step framework isn't valid or wouldn't work. And I do think this idea that there's the educated people and then the non-educated people is binary polarization, which is pushing people away by saying they're all stupid. How can they believe that? Everyone's beliefs start from somewhere. And I will sit in rooms with people who are very, very resistant towards inclusion. And how do you even approach that? Well, firstly, they are a great learning source for understanding why we're at where we're at. I sit and listen. I don't judge them. They're expecting to be judged. They keep being told they're going to be judged. And when they're not judged, they're all of a sudden a little bit like, oh, I'm being heard. That's something that I don't get often in society. This person taking a few steps towards me. Maybe I'll take a few steps towards them. And then start to actually become a bit more open, a bit more vulnerable, and gradually move into a place where they stop talking about the sound bites they've heard on social media that have annoyed them, and the few things that they've knitted together from certain voices that they kind of trust, but only because they've made them feel comfortable. And they actually start to say, well, actually, Lee, for all that, I'm actually just annoyed because I'm going through this. I'm going through divorce. I'm going through health issues. I'm going through financial challenges. I'm going through stuff, and the world just doesn't seem to care. And it doesn't seem to rank in the priorities. Everyone else has got it harder. What about me? We do live in an individualistic society. Men's challenges do sometimes get. I mean, if I think about women's and men's challenges, men report more out of workplace challenges when we do this work in workplaces than women do. So men have got other stuff happening to them in society that's worrying them and taking that headspace. And then, I understand if someone goes to that group of people who are going through struggling and they feel like they're sinking, things are really pretty volatile and a lot of people are struggling out there at the minute, and then tells them, oh, well, you need to be an ally for this whole group of people. That would make me annoyed because it deflects in my struggles and telling me that I need to help with these massive systemic challenges that a whole group of people's facing. That, truth be told, I haven't necessarily created those. I might have been a part of it on my journey without even realizing it. But when it comes back to it, institutional power in the world it is today is held by a tiny group of men who, sadly, have so much power they can tell almost every other man on the planet how they should be, even though almost every other man on the planet will never be in such a resource-heavy situation that they can just be how they... the truth is, those few men, they can be how they want to be because they've garnered so much resource and extracted so much from other people on the planet that there isn't really anything that stops them being 100% authentic, as much of an idiot as they might be. The truth is, for everyone else, we're not in that place. And it really, really frustrates me when certain figures purposely create division, upset people, and create polarity, and even go on the streets to celebrate it, and then go back to the 7-bedroom gated mansion with the private security and probably laugh at people who are struggling to make ends meet. That balls my piss.
Yeah. Vote for Lee Chambers. Thank you for your TED talk, Lee. No, I totally agree. And I was gonna, around the point around the education, and there's been some fantastic points in the comments, so I will loop back later on today. But the one thing I wanted to add in as well, we were talking about resources and educating. I wanted to, I guess, loop back to what Leighton was saying around almost like this reciprocal, this kind of going back to your view on like the origins of the word ally, and kind of like the working together piece in terms of all genders coming together and working together. There's something about what do women need to do to be more receptive to allyship, right? And certainly for me, I would say one of the complete game changers for me was Richard Reeves's book, like 100%. Reading that book, Richard Reeves, of Boys Men. If you haven't read that book, if you're a woman and you have not read that book, you have to read that book. It is an absolute game changer. You will totally think very differently about boys and men and this whole topic and the interaction between gender. So I think it's really important because it links to what you were saying there, Lee, in terms of at the end of the day, men are not a monolith. Right, men are not a monolith, and just because we see the Elon Musks of the world and the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses, right, at the top of the tree, that does not mean that all men are like kind of sitting pretty, kind of just ruling everything, and that we need to go to those men to kind of fix everything for women, because actually a lot of men are going through their own challenges as well. So this is kind of about how do we, and the work that you do, if I sort of like paraphrase it, is how do we train a group that maybe haven't had like the kind of the coding and the social skills about those, like the relational kind of work, I guess, that we can do in society, right, on ourselves and with other people. This is about that, right? This isn't about Men need to fix this system that they've broken. There's just a few men at the top that need to do that. What's it called again? Chantal, was that the book that maybe Richard Reeves of Boys and Men is the book? I think we've gone for nearly an hour, and as much as I don't want to bring this to an end, I feel like people have got things to do, right? Including I'm kidding. I could go on for another hour, like seriously. And I'm gonna ask Lee to some. I was gonna say to Lee, if people want to find out more, everybody knows where to find Lee. If you want to find Lee, maybe I will bring Lee to the Middle East, right? Those of you that are maybe listening that saw me there, and we had some networks come together. Maybe that's where we need to take Lee next. Very different context. Do you work global, Lee? Do you do global stuff or mainly UK?
So probably 50% UK, a lot more Europe now, and then some APAC and America stuff. And we are deeply looking at these kind of cultural differences in this work language. So, for example, allyship translates very differently, even across 27 European member nations. It's just considering the geopolitical climates, the cultural nuances, the maturity of this conversation. But what I'm really interested in, Cheryl, is in the Middle East so far, what we're finding is, on one side, the lack of maturity in the conversation, but the innovative perception of what can be done. It's not like in the UK, we're quite often, well, we've done it like this for a long time, so we're wedded into these ways. What I'm seeing is some really interesting practice out in the Middle East, because they're not bound by having to do it how we've always kind of done it. So I'm fascinated to see where that goes over the next year.
It is fascinating. And I think when it comes to gender, the one book as well that we didn't mention, which is one of my favorites, I'm sure you've come across it, is The Patriarchs, right, by Angela Saini. So The Patriarchs, How Men Came to Rule, is what I love about it, is it doesn't only look through that Western lens. It looks very much at, different civilizations, different societies, more Asia, etc. And there are differences. The world isn't as kind of like gendered just through this Western lens. So some really interesting learns from there as well. Final thoughts from you, Lee. If you could choose just one thing that organizations should do in this space and to kind of advance this agenda, kind of genders working together, what would it be? If organizations could just do one thing, what would it be? What would you recommend?
Oh man, just one thing.
Just one thing.
I think it's creating a space where men can explore this, if I'm honest. We look at networks. It might be a strand or a pillar or an existing network. It might be a network
or a
itself.
men's network. More men's networks.
A men's network, given that men don't have that space in wider society. And it just creates a maturity of conversation around everything from prostate cancer to fatherhood to fertility, and also a space where men can start to explore some of these allyship skills, kind of realize that being an ally on your own is a very, very difficult and lonely journey. But just having a collective of men, because the truth is, allyship, as in brotherhood between men, we need more of that in society as well.
Absolutely.
So that'd be my thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amazing. Spaces for men to explore this. Love that. My one thing would be, especially for the women listening to this, is to meet people where they are, right? Meet men where they are, and just give them grace. Just a bit more grace. And we need a lot more grace on social media. So that would be my ask. Just a little bit more grace as more men come into this space. And I think it's I think it's incredible that people are doing this work and that these sorts of conversations are happening. Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish we'd done this sooner. Now that I've got somebody helping me to book my LinkedIn live guests, I'm getting much sort of better conversations. And this has been absolutely incredible. So thank you again, Lee, for your wisdom and for the work that you're doing in this space and raising the profile of it as well.
No, thank you, Cheryl. And I'm looking forward to our collaboration next year. Woo.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody that joined us. I know some people literally have been on since 8:30. So thank you for taking an hour out to join the conversation, to put your comments in. And if you're watching on the replay, thank you so much for taking 1 hour, 4 minutes and 17 seconds out of your day. That's it for this week. Everybody have an amazing week. We will be back. I'll be back next week with some friends. So there's actually going to be quite a few people on. It's like an end of year, like Christmas, virtual Christmas party LinkedIn Live thing. So look out for that. But Lee, thanks again. It's been amazing.